Okay, good evening, everybody. I want to thank you all for being with us tonight. We have committed the sin of live streaming. Walk in front of the camera. Want to thank you all for taking the time to come out here and be with us. A special thank you to the Sandoval family for coming all the way from Missouri. How long was the drive?
6 hours.
Really? Oh, okay. I thought it was going to be more than that. All right. Awesome. And another thank you to Jen, because this has been in the making for just over 18 months, apparently.
He kept us waiting a long time.
Yeah. So, well, we praise God for that, because that shows that, you're busy doing the work. So, thank you for coming out here. Thank you, Jen, for making this possible. And not to delay anymore, right, to give Dr. Sandoval the time, I'm going to share with you his bio to give you a little bit of his background. I'm sure he will share that with us as he gives his presentation. But Dr. Mark Sandoval obtained his doctorate in medicine from Loma Linda University School of Medicine and subsequently obtained his board certification in emergency medicine and lifestyle medicine. While a missionary physician in Trinidad and Tobago, God gave him a passion for health education. He became involved in radio and TV health programming, development of health literature, and organizing health outreach around the island. At that time, he founded Health by the Book, a not-for-profit organization promoting health and wellness across the island. Subsequently, he served as medical director and president of Uchee Pines Institute, as well as director of the Health Ministries Department of the Gulf States Conference. Wow, okay, I didn't know that. Currently, he is the founder and president of New Paradigm Ministries, a counseling/health ministry which focuses on restoring life. And life is an acronym for living free, improving relationships, finding purpose, experiencing health to people in bondage. He is the father of 6 wonderful children and the husband of 1 amazing wife and the adopted son of the God of love. So now I'll turn the microphone over to Dr. Mark Sandoval. And I hope everyone is blessed and benefited by this presentation.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here with you. And it's my habit to pray before I begin, so I'm going to pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your blessings. And I ask for your presence to be here with us and to teach us what you want us to know. And this I pray, thanking you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So, yes, we have come down from Missouri, and it's not very far. It's only 6 hours from here. And it was a pleasant trip. And we're gratefully full about, well, I guess at that time it was 18 months in advance, and now it's about 2 years in advance. And the Lord knows how that will go. And we're going to be looking this evening about what I didn't learn in medical school. So there's lots of things that you do learn in medical school, and if I was to try to teach you all of those things, then it would take us a little while, because it takes 4 years in medical school, and lots of time, and lots of study, and all of that kind of stuff. But I'll tell you, there's very few things that you learn in medical school that you really need for life. So yes, I did do medicine, and my first career in medicine was emergency, and then I transitioned to lifestyle, and this is Uchee Pines Institute, the lifestyle center there. And I went to learn, some of you might have heard of Dr. Agatha Thrash, and so I went to learn from Dr. Agatha about how to treat individuals with natural remedies and lifestyle interventions. I had become interested in that before I transitioned to Uchee Pines, and she was a wonderful teacher and a co-worker, and then eventually I got to take care of her in the last of her life. And while I was at Uchee Pines, well, let me back up. While I was in emergency medicine, you know, when you're in the ER, you don't have the privilege of having patients over and over and over again, usually. And the patients that you do get over and over again are the ones that you don't necessarily want to have over and over and over again, because they're usually there seeking for some kind of things they can't get from their regular doctor from a prescription standpoint. And they fabricate all sorts of different reasons why to be in the emergency department in order to try to get the drug of their choice. Otherwise, usually individuals are not so unlucky to end up in so many different motor vehicle accidents or stab wounds or gunshots or other things of that nature that I get to recognize them coming into the emergency department and be like, oh, hey, you're back again. So you usually see somebody once and then you don't see them again. It tends to be how it is in the ER. And so there's no opportunity for really developing relationships with your patients to any appreciable degree. When I transitioned, actually from ER, we went to the mission field, and in the mission hospital, I was working as ER and family practice. So I was director of ER and family practice for the hospital. And so then I had also family patients, so the family patients would come back, you know. So now I'm dealing with a different set of patients, and this time, instead of dealing with gunshots and stab wounds and, you know, snake bites and other things like that, now we're dealing with high blood pressure, and we're dealing with diabetes, and we're dealing with obesity, and we're dealing with these types of things. And you know, I wasn't taught really how to take care of that stuff long term because my training was ER training. And so, you know, I had to learn a little bit more of the long-term care in relation to some of these conditions. And so my patients would come and they would have their condition and I would give them a prescription that should help them with that. And they'd come back 6 months later and they'd still have the condition. And so then I would give them, you know, I'd renew the prescription, and if their condition looked like it was worse, I would increase the dose or I would add the second medication to it, and then come back another 6 months and they still have the condition, and I'm still trying to figure out what medications to give them in order to keep their condition under control. And it didn't take me very long to realize that I wasn't really doing much of anything because they continue to have their condition, and they continue to have their condition, and I went into medicine to help people. And I didn't feel like I was really doing it. And so it was around that time that I started learning more about lifestyle, and I realized that it was better for me to educate than to medicate. And so then that came to the decision of transferring or transitioning to lifestyle and lifestyle medicine, which never promises you much as far as money is concerned, but it does promise you more in relation to what you can do for your patients. And so while I was there at Uchee Pines, I began to, you know, experience what it was like to use natural remedies and lifestyle interventions to help individuals with their conditions, and to help them to get off of some of their medications. And the thing that I noticed is that in lifestyle, things happen slower. In the hospital, if you don't get an effect within 30 minutes of whatever you gave the patient, well, you need to try something else, right? Because most of what you give is going to kick in within about 30 minutes. If it's intravenous, well, it might kick in really fast, but you know, most things that you give happen over 30 minutes. In lifestyle, well, you're looking at whether it's going to happen today or whether it's going to happen tomorrow or whether it's, you know, but it's a bit slower. And doctors are pretty much bred to be skeptical. And so even though I had chosen to go to Uchee Pines and I was there to learn how to do lifestyle medicine and you know, shouldn't they be in the hospital? And are you sure? Dandelion? I mean, that grows in the yard. And they've got this condition. And I was skeptical. And she said, oh, Dr. Mark, just wait and watch. Okay. So in my anxious ER ways, I was twiddling my thumbs and I was waiting and watching, and then, and then I started seeing things start to happen and things starting to change a little bit and so on, and then an individual starting to improve and getting better, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And so then after having my own patients and managing them in this way and seeing things turn around time and time again, I was like, oh, this works, right? This really works. But then I ran into a problem after a while of being there, and that is that I would find out that patients that came to the Lifestyle Center, they did well while they were with us, but a lot of them didn't do well when they went home. They do the lifestyle and they do all the stuff when they were there, but when they went home, it wasn't doing so much stuff, And so how can we encourage them to do better and remain better over a longer period of time? And then there were some seminal cases that I had that really started to change my thinking in relation to what's going on with individuals and why we have the conditions that we do. In one of those cases, I call her Michelle, that's not her name, but Michelle came and she was struggling with cancer. She had ovarian cancer, and hers was stage 3C, just before you get to stage 4. And she had 11 tumors in her abdominal cavity, in addition to the original ovarian tumor. And she had been through 2 rounds of chemotherapy, and each round of chemotherapy, her cancer was bigger and more number. And, so she did the first round, she did the second round, and now she was an athlete. She had been an athlete when she was younger. She was a coach in her life, so a very active individual. Now it's difficult for her to walk even, just kind of, it hit her hard. And so they suggested that she do an experimental regimen of, a new combination of chemotherapeutic agents to see if this would, do anything with her cancer. And to sign up for a clinical trial, and she thought about it, and she was like, no, I'm done with this. And so she got online, and she found Uchee Pines, and she ended up coming. And I was her physician. And so we did what we do. I put her on a whole food plant-based diet and get her outside in the fresh air and sunshine as much as possible, put her on an exercise program called walking. And at the beginning, because, the chemotherapy had been pretty hard on her, just walking around the building was a bit much, because it was a good, it's a pretty good size, so walking around in the different places in the building. And so she'd come around and she'd walk around in the parking lot a little bit, and then a little bit more of the parking lot, and then kind of around the building and so on, and each day it kind of built up from there. And we did hydrotherapy treatments with her, basically boiling the egg, and she was the egg, and the bathtub was the pot, all right? And so we did hyperthermia treatment, so dropping her in the hot water and waiting for her temperature to go up and keeping it up for a while and so on. There's scientific reasons for it. When you're that hot, you don't care. You just want to wait. You just want the treatment to get over so you can get out of it. We did that, and we used some herbs and other things of that nature. And when she came to us, her blood tests for her cancer were high. And after 2.5 weeks, she was able to go for about 1.5 miles, and for the part of the time she'd walk, and part of the time she would jog, and then another part of the time she'd walk, and then she'd jog, and then she'd walk, and she'd jog. She was getting a lot more energy back. She was feeling great, and her cancer markers were back down into the normal range. And so, hey, she was happy, we were happy, and besides the natural remedy side of things, when you're in a lifestyle center, you have more time that you can spend with your patients. And one of the curses of the healthcare system is that you just don't have time, at least from a physician standpoint, you don't have time with the patients, because you have to see so many patients, and and so you don't have the time. And so there's certain questions that you just don't ask in medicine, because you know if you ask those types of questions, it's going to kill your time. You know, like how are you? You know, you can ask the polite question like how are you, but don't ever ask how are you really doing.
Yeah, right.
Right? Because if you ask the second question, how are you really doing? Well, somebody might turn into a puddle of tears, and they might really tell you how they're doing, and you really don't have the time to listen to how things are really doing and get to the bottom of it and bring some kind of solution to it, because you just don't have the time. So don't ask the questions if you don't have the time. Well, in the Lifestyle Center, you got time. And so now I could start asking the questions that I couldn't ask in the regular system because I had the time to do it. And so, you know, I asked her how she was doing, and then I started digging a little bit more in regards to her life, and found out that, well, she never knew who her father was. He was gone before she was born, and she was born in one country, and he had left to another country, and her mother raised her for a little while. That was until she was 8 years old. And her mother was kind of a party girl, drugs and alcohol and parties and men and all that kind of stuff. And an 8-year-old was kind of a drag on that lifestyle. And so Mom left her with the grandparents, for the grandparents to raise her, which it's never nice to be abandoned by mother, and nobody ever takes that well. But it was a good thing because grandparents were grounded. And so, you know, they helped to be a stabilizing factor as far as Michelle was concerned and the rest of her life growing up. But her mother came back into the picture every so often, and now mother was jealous of the relationship that Michelle had with her grandparents, because now she called her grandmother Mom and she called her grandfather Dad. And when that lady came into the picture, she was not going to call her mom or mother or acknowledge anything of that nature. And so there was, you know, there was that issue, there was that, you know, that conflict going on there. And she had a lot of resentment against her mother in relation to how she had treated her and so on through the years. And I knew that resentment and bitterness were not going to help her condition. And so, in addition to dealing with hydrotherapy and natural remedies and other things of that nature, we started dealing with the resentment and the bitterness. And how? Well, we'll talk about that later. But we were focusing on those things as well. And so the end of her 2.5 weeks is over. She's feeling great. She's exercising much better. Her cancer markers in the normal range. She goes home. 2 months after she goes home, she has a follow-up scan, and half of the tumors are gone, and the remaining tumors are significantly smaller than what they had been previously. So clearly, this thing is reversing. 2 months after that, we get another call, and it's boo-hoo-hoo, the cancer marker's back up. Okay, so what's going on? Are you still eating the diet? Yeah. Are you still taking the herbs? Yeah. Are you still doing the hydrotherapy? Yeah. Are you still exercising? Yes. Are you still getting your sunshine and fresh air? Yes. Are you still taking the supplement? Yes. Are you still? Yes. 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 All right, what happened? What happened? Mom came back in the picture. Yeah, Mom came back, and Mom created the chaos that Mom usually creates when Mom comes, you know, and so on. And Michelle happened to forget pretty much everything that we had talked about previously, and she was back in the resentment and the bitterness and so on and so forth. And so I spent another hour talking with her and about that situation and how she can resolve those issues and doesn't have to be subject to Mom's behavior and so on and so forth. Not that you control Mom, but you don't need her to behave a certain way in order for you to love her. Because if you need her to behave a certain way for you to love her, you don't love her.
That's right.
Because love loves regardless of what they're like. Right?
Yeah.
And if you need to love her like that, then you need to love. You've got to have a source where you can get that from. Right? And so you've got to go to God, and you've got to take a love from God that can love despite what she's like, so that you can love her with God's love. And so she got back on the horse, and guess what? The next call, cancer markers back in the normal range. Right? So there's a lot of factors when you're dealing with a patient. You're doing all sorts of different things. It's kind of hard to kind of filter through all of the different factors to figure out, well, what's the big deal? Is it the diet, or is it the hydro, or is it the herbs, is it this, that, and the other thing? Well, in her case, it became very clear to me, because really the only thing that changed was the relationship stuff. And it was clear that her thought pattern in relation to her mother was a driving factor when it came to the cancer, and that as it resolved, the cancer started going away, and as it came back, the cancer started growing again, and then as it resolved, the cancer started going away again. Very clear correlation between what was going on in her mind and what was happening in her body. And so that got me thinking, and I've been thinking a lot about that since then. And so let's dive in a few things. Here we have a tree, and if you have a tree that has some bad fruit, bad leaves, is the problem the bad fruit or the bad leaves? No, that's just the symptom. That's just the evidence, the manifestation. So yes, that's the symptom. So symptoms, yeah, they're symptoms. How many on a usual tree? Can you count how many leaves are on it? It'd take you a long time. I remember one of my assignments in one of my biology classes was to pick a 1 foot square section of the ground and then identify everything that's in that 1 foot square, and which plants it is, what's its genus and species, and what classification does it come in, and all that kind of stuff. That's a lot. It's a lot. 1 foot, that's it. Just 12 inches by 12 inches, that's it. That was a lot. It took a long time to get that stuff figured out. But you go to a tree, tons of leaves. And there are tons of symptoms. Right? So what do we, you got pain and cough and itching and sore throat and runny nose and, weakness and myalgias and other things of that nature. What do we do when we have symptoms? Yeah, we treat the symptoms. So there's a pill for every ill. You got runny nose? Well, there's a decongestant. Right? You got pain? There's an analgesic. You got itching? There's a there's a cholinergic or something of that nature, right? Benadryl or whatever. And there's usually multiple options for every symptom that you have. Right? Now, it's not to say don't ever treat the symptoms, but recognize that symptoms are not the problem. Right? Symptoms are only a manifestation that there's a problem. So let's imagine that you have pain. You got pain in your back, and it's right there between your shoulder blades. It's sharp stabbing. It came on suddenly. It's killing you. You can't lay on your back. It's just, oh man, it's even hard to breathe, and it's so painful. And you take some Tylenol. That doesn't really do anything. You take some ibuprofen. That doesn't really do anything. And at 2 o'clock, when you still can't sleep because of the pain, you're like, all right, let me go to the ER. And you go to the ER, and unfortunately some bus accident happened, and they're dealing with all sorts of traumas, and they cannot get to you, thank you. But they can write you a prescription. So they write you a prescription for something that's stronger, and you can go fill that and then see your family doctor tomorrow. And so you fill it, and you take it, and it takes that little edge off of it, but it's still painful. You can't still lay on your back, and it's just horrible. And you finally go to your doctor's office, and they do an exam and find out, there's a reason why you got back pain. Okay? And the reason was your mouth got big, your foot got inserted, and you said a few things that you shouldn't have, and you were not watching when you turned your back. And anyway, so did the pill take care of the problem? No, it didn't take care of the problem. It might take care of some of the symptoms, but it doesn't take care of the problem. Right? And symptoms are like a fire alarm. Is a fire alarm a good thing or a bad thing?
Good thing.
Okay? So, if the fire alarm is going off, does that indicate a good thing or a bad thing? Yeah, it indicates there's something bad, but is the fire alarm part of the good thing or part of the bad thing?
Good.
Yeah, it's the good side of the bad situation, right? So what's the bad thing when there's a fire alarm?
Fire.
Yeah, it's the fire, right? And so the fire alarm is there in order to keep you from being burned up by the fire. But fire alarms are annoying. And they're annoying on purpose. Right? They are created on purpose to be annoying so that you cannot be comfortable while the fire alarm is going off. For the very reason for you to go be aware that there is a problem and go look for the fire. But what if your solution when the fire alarm is going off is that you get a pillow and you stick it over the fire alarm? And you get tired of holding it, so you get some duct tape and you tape it down. Then you go back to bed. And you burn up. Whose fault is it? Well, yeah, it's yours because you ignored the fire alarm, right? Or you treated the effect and not the cause, right? So the effect was the fire alarm and it going off. The cause was the fire, and you went and treated the effect, and you turned off the signal that there was a problem, right? So that's a problem with just doing symptom care, is what we do is we turn off the signal that's there to let us know that there's an underlying problem, and we don't deal with the underlying problem. Now, the fruit and the leaves don't grow by themselves, they grow on the branches, and the branches represent our behaviors or our actions. This is what we do. We breathe, we drink, we eat, and so on. And every human has the same actions, and we might do them at a different rate, different frequency, different depth, different whatever, and so on. But every one of us has to breathe, we gotta drink, we gotta eat, and these are very basics. So if you simply deal with symptoms, you're dealing with things that are very superficial. Once you start dealing with behaviors, it gets a little deeper. But not deep enough. And that's one thing that I found in the Lifestyle Center in dealing with individuals is behavioral modification is not enough. It's not sufficient. Because if you simply help somebody to behaviorally modify and then you send them home, well, they're going to behaviorally remodify, right? Because there's a reason why everybody has their lifestyle. And if you don't get to the reason, you're not going to get any significant long-term change, right? So you have to get down to the reason of what's going on. And the action is not the reason, it's just a manifestation of the reason. Now, the branches don't grow from themselves, they grow on the trunk. And the trunk represents our needs. And so we need water, we need oxygen, we need food. These are various different things that we need. Can you change what you need? No. Can you decide, all right, well, today I don't need oxygen? Well, you can come to that decision, but you'll find out quite quickly that you have no right to make that decision. Right? And you have no capacity to decide what you need. In fact, nobody can choose what they need. Nobody. It's fixed. There is no choice for what you need. Right? And what you need, that doesn't change. I mean, the fact that you need it. Now, you can be under different circumstances and situations, and under certain circumstances you might need more oxygen, and others you might need less. And in some circumstances you need more water, and some you need less, and so on. So the amount can change, but what you need cannot change, right? And everything that you need, since this doesn't change, everything else has to change around it in order to match it, right? You need oxygen, therefore you breathe. You need water, therefore you drink. You need food, therefore you eat. The behaviors are there in order to supply the needs. And if the behaviors match with what you need, then what you need will be supplied, and things should work okay. But if the behaviors don't match what you need, then, well, then something's coming. It's coming. And everything that you need, the oxygen, water, food, and whatever else it is Does it come from inside of you, or does it come from outside of you? Yeah, it comes from outside. So the oxygen comes from outside of you, and if it stays at your nose, you die. It doesn't matter how close it comes to the outside of you, you're going to die if it doesn't come inside, right. And so it must get inside and become a part of you in order for you to live. And the water comes from outside of you, and if it stays at your lips, you die. The only way you're going to live is if it comes inside, right? So once it comes inside of you, then you can live by it. So the purpose of your behaviors is to supply your needs. Now, if you are running out of oxygen, who has to breathe? All right? So if you're suffocating back there, I'm going to compensate by... Is that going to work? No, not for you or for me, right? Because I'm going to hyperventilate and get problems from that, and you're going to suffocate and have problems from that, and neither of us are going to be helped by it, right? So if you're suffocating, guess what?
It's up to you.
You have to breathe. That's right. And if you're starving, you have to eat. And if you're dehydrating, you have to drink, right? So you need oxygen. That doesn't just blow into you. You've got to breathe. And you need a water. It doesn't just squirt down your throat. You have to drink it. And you need food, and it doesn't just crawl down your throat, hopefully, right? You've got to eat it. Right? So everybody's got to bring in what they need. And so everything first takes in what it needs, and then it gives away. And what it gives away, something else gets blessed by it or benefited by it. Right? How big would you be if you kept every bite of food you ever ate? Well, I probably wouldn't make it through these doors. That door would be more likely, but still, even. In an average human lifespan, we eat about 6 elephants worth of food. So, by the end of your lifetime, you'd be pretty big. What if you kept every swallow of liquid you ever drank? Or every breath of air you ever breathed? I mean, we would be absolutely huge, right? But it's clear we don't. You take in, but you give, right? You take in solids, you give solids. You take in liquids, you give liquids. You take in gas, you give gas, right? And so on. So everything takes and it gives, but you can't give what you don't have, so you can't give first. You have to take first, then you can give, right? Now, the trunk doesn't grow from itself. What does it grow from?
The roots.
The roots. And now we get underground. Right? The roots represent our beliefs. And you don't necessarily know what an individual believes until you dig. Right? So you got to have a conversation, talk with the individual, find out, ask them questions, or observe them long enough. Because what an individual believes will manifest itself in how they behave. So, if you believe that you need Dr. Pepper, what will you do? Yeah, you're going to drink Dr. Pepper, right? So what you believe is going to impact your behavior. But do you need Dr. Pepper? No, clearly not. Right? Now, you can live off of Dr. Pepper for a while because it does have some things you need. Right? Most of Dr. Pepper is water. And you need water, right? And a good portion of Dr. Pepper is sugar. And you can live off of sugar for a while, right? If you had no sugar, right, no glucose or whatever, well, you would die. But if you have it in that form for too long, then it's going to kill you too, right? But it also has things that you don't need, and so while you're taking in some things you do, you're taking in other things that you don't, and the final effect of that is going to be bad fruit, bad leaves. So if your beliefs do not match your needs, then your behaviors are not going to supply what you need, and you're going to end up with bad fruit and bad leaves. So it's important that our beliefs match with our needs, because then our behaviors can supply what we need, and then we can end up with good fruit and good leaves. Right? But if you have a tree that has some bad fruit and bad leaves, where do you go looking for the problem?
The soil.
Ah, all right. It's in the soil. And the soil represents our sources. Okay? And the sources are important as well. If that soil has too little water, that tree is going to show, it's going to manifest the problem, right? Because it now has a deficiency. If that soil has too much water, that tree is going to manifest the problem. And if you've been watering it with diesel instead of water, well, it's going to manifest the problem because it just wasn't made for that. So you must have a source that has what you need in the quantity that you need it. You must have beliefs that match with your needs. Then your behaviors can supply what you need, and you can end up with good fruit and good leaves. Now, how many people need love?
Everyone.
All right, yep. Okay. Yeah. Anybody here not need love? Yeah. You know what? You know what Legos are? I mean, not Legos. You know what Matchbox cars are called? Love and little metal packages. Yeah. So everybody needs love. Now, does love function differently than your other needs? Or does it function similar to your other needs? Well, when it comes to our needs, you cannot choose what you need. Can you choose whether you need love or not? No. No. You can deny that you need it, just like you can deny that you need oxygen, but you'll find out pretty soon it doesn't work. Right? Now, everything that you need comes from outside of you and must be brought inside of you in order for you to live. So, where does love come from? Inside of you or outside of you? All right. You need oxygen so you breathe. You need water so you drink. You need food so you eat. You need love so you...
Can love.
All right. All right. That is the answer I get every time. That is the answer. Right? So I'm going to take that answer like I usually do, and we'll turn it around. I need oxygen, so therefore I oxygen. I need water, therefore I water.
No.
I need food, therefore I food. Right?
Okay.
I need oxygen, therefore I breathe out. Is that how it works?
In.
No. I need water, therefore I pee. No, that's not how it works, right? I need food, therefore I eject tissue or something like that. I don't know, you know. Is that how it works? No. No, it never works that way. If you need it, what must you do? You have to take it. You got to bring it in, right? But we're under the delusion, and it is a delusion, and we're all under it. That's why I get this answer, the same answer everywhere I go. We're all under the same delusion, and that is, in order for love, I must give love. Right? And I must give it first in order to receive it. Right? So if I give it first, then where does it come from? No? If I give it first, where does it come from?
From me.
Me.
It comes from me. So whose love is it?
Mine.
My love. Right? It's my love. How many mothers have loved your children with all of your love?
That's a trick question.
Yeah? Yeah, it's a trick question. Yes? You think so. You think you have put all of your love into your children, when you are never the source of love. So, what do you put into them if it comes from you? Right. And if you don't go and take it first, how can you ever give it? Right? All right. So, what is the action of taking in the love that I need? Well, let's imagine you were having a bad day, and after that bad day, whatever went on during work and so on and so forth, you came home and you stopped at the mail, and at the mail there was a letter. And the letter had your name on it, and it was handwritten, and the return address, name and address was a good one. You know who the individual is, and this is the good individual to have this letter from. And you open it up, and it says, "Dear," and it has your name there, and it says, "I've been thinking about you, can't get you off my mind, thinking about the last time we were together, and looking forward to when we can be together in the future." And then it goes on to say other mushy, gushy, doubly stuff along there in the meantime, you know, and then it ends with love, and it has their name there, and it has XOXO, teddy bear, heart, you know, whatever, you know. So how do you feel after you read that letter? Yeah, you feel love, right? So how much love was in the ink? How much love was in the paper? How much love was in the envelope? Yeah? Can we get it and extract it and concentrate it and stick it in an injection, and then I can just inject you with it and you're like, oh, I'm loved. Okay. Is that how it works? No. So where's the love in the letter? Oh. All right. Yeah, so it's good to think about these things.
Does it mean more if they stick money in it?
Does it? Well, it might. Does it mean more if they stick money in it? Right? It might. Unless you're dying of thirst. Then it would mean more if they put a bottle of water in it. So, what does that letter contain?
Words.
Okay, an expression of love, words. It contains information. That letter contains information. And information can be put into something that is physical. It can be transmitted by something that is physical. It can be stored in something that is physical. But information never originates in something that is physical. Information never originates in something that's physical. Yes, it can be put into the physical and transmitted and stored in the physical, but it never originates in the physical. So how did the information get to that letter?
Through the person.
All right, so it was through a person. No, it was through a pen or a pencil, and there was somebody that was holding that, and information was sent through the muscles, and the muscles attached to the bone, and that, you know, and so on and so forth, and that information was sent by the nerves, and that information from the nerves was coming from the brain, and that information was coming from somewhere. Yeah. Now remember, information never originates in the physical. It can be contained in the physical, but it never originates in the physical. That individual has a mind. That individual has a mind. And from that mind, the information was transmitted through all of these physical components onto the paper, and it was put in a certain code that you and I have learned to decipher, right? And in our case, it might be the English language, and you deciphered that information, you evaluated it, extracted it, and you understood that information to mean love. And more specifically, you understood it to mean that person loves you. And so how did you get that into you? Now that's the deciphering, but what is it that brings it in? Okay, close. Trust, right? Close. So in the Greek, there's three words that pretty much have the same, well, they have the same core word structure to it. Trust is one of the words. Faith is one of the words. And belief is one of the words. Right? So, you believe that they love you. And when you believe that they love you, you take it in. Right? So, it's an issue of belief. It's an issue of faith. Right? That takes that in, and when you take it in, now it's inside, now you can live by it. Right? But if you received that letter, and it was handwritten, and so on and so forth, and you read it, and it was said all of the same stuff, and at the bottom it was signed, your local used car dealer, please come visit me. Would you feel loved? No, same information, but you wouldn't feel loved because you don't believe it, right? So it's belief that brings it in and makes it yours, right? So you need oxygen, so you breathe. You need water, so you drink. You need food, so you eat. You need love, so you think. It's actually a thought process. It's a processing of information, coming to comprehend what it means, and then believing it and accepting it. That's what brings in the love. Right? Now, what if I believe that people are the source of the love that I need? You figured that one out already. All right, problems. Yeah. You don't necessarily have to get married to figure that out, but once you get married, you figure that out. And dating doesn't necessarily figure that out. Sometimes it's just after you're dating you figure that out. All right, so yes, you're going to end up having problems if you think people are the source of the love that you need. Because if people are the source of the oxygen that you need, then what do you have to do?
CPR.
Well, you have to go do reverse mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, right? And you suck their air out, and then they die, and you got to find somebody else really fast to suck their air out, and so on. And eventually, everybody's going to die, and you're going to die too, because you ran out, and we're all done for. And what if somebody else is the source of the water that you need? And somehow you got a water extractor so that you can continue to live. Now somebody's dying, and then somebody else is dying, and somebody else is dying until everybody's dead. And what if somebody else is the source of your food? Right? That's not going to work so well either. Cannibalism until everybody's dead. But when it comes to love, we are cannibals. We are. We're cannibals. Right? Because we think of others as our source, but we also think we are the source. And so for love, we give in order to receive, right? And we got it all backwards when it comes to love. And we wonder why relationships don't work, and why these things don't work, and why is my mom not work, and I have bitterness and resentment and all that kind of stuff, and why is it just not working? Now, everything that functions is governed by law, and all laws that govern function don't change, right? They stay the same. And that's a good thing. Right? If gravity was like down today and sideways tomorrow, and halfway through tomorrow it went up, and then after you were flying through the air about 25,000 feet, it turned down, well, life wouldn't last very long, right? So laws that govern function are unchangeable, and that's a good thing. And proper function is only maintained when we remain within the law. Dysfunction is the result of going outside of the law. And when we talk about dysfunction, and when we talk about law, there is a fundamental law of all nature. And that fundamental law has two components to it. One is that nothing exists or functions from itself. That means everything needs something. Everything needs power. Everything needs material, resources. In our case, food, water, oxygen, and so on and so forth. And everything you need must come from outside of yourself. And if it doesn't come in, I'm sorry, you don't exist, you don't function, you don't live. And the second part of it is that nothing exists or functions for itself. That means that everything takes in those things that it needs, but then it passes something along. So it passes power along, and it passes material and resources along, and then something else benefits from what is passed along. In simplistic terms, the fundamental law is that everything takes to give. Everything takes in order to give. And built upon this law are things like thermodynamics. That's all energy necessary for a system to function must come from outside that system. No system produces all the power that it needs in order to continue its own function. That would be a perpetual motion machine, which doesn't exist. Now, you might go and Google perpetual motion machine and find thousands and thousands of them, but it's dependent upon external forces, like sunlight, or the Earth's gravity, or the Earth's orbit, or things of that nature. So it's actually using an external force. You just can't see the external force, and so it looks like it is a perpetual motion machine. It's not. The energy has to come from somewhere, and it doesn't come from inside the system, it comes from outside the system. And cause and effect comes from this fundamental law, because every effect cannot produce itself. The material powers, resources had to come from somewhere else. So where it came from, that's the cause. Right? So every effect, there's a cause. And every cause is going to produce an effect. Right? And this fundamental law is the law of life. Right? The law of life, taking and giving. And because everything functions according to the law this way, and there is cause and effect, if, the symptom, is the symptom a cause or an effect?
The effect.
It's the effect, right. So if all I do is I treat the effect, but the cause remains, what's the cause going to have to do?
Stop.
Have an effect.
All right, so the cause is going to have to produce another effect. Because as long as the cause remains, it must manifest its presence somehow. Right? So if I treat the effect and take the effect away, but the cause still remains, now the cause is going to have to manifest itself another way. And this can be an interesting train of events that happens by law. So there's an individual that I know of, and trying to remember the sequence of events that happened, but anyways, they had a heart valve that was getting skinnier and skinnier and skinnier over the years, and the doctor said, well, it's time to get that one replaced. And up until the year before this time, that was always an open heart procedure. So crack the chest and, do open heart surgery and replace the valve and so on and so forth. And about a year before that time, they figured out a procedure that they could do it through the veins and not have to open the chest and so on. And so they opted to go ahead and have that procedure. And they had that procedure, and after the procedure was done, then it was, a couple of weeks later, and they're completely short of breath, sitting on the floor in the aisle of Walmart, and calling me and telling me that they're short of breath and sitting on the floor in the aisle of Walmart. And I told them, go to the hospital now. You should not be that tired and short of breath that you have to sit down, And so they went to the hospital and found out that they had a 3rd-degree heart block. So now the electrical activity for the heart isn't working like it's supposed to. So then they had a pacemaker that was placed. And after the pacemaker's in for a while, they develop a hernia. and then they have surgery to fix the hernia, and after the hernia is fixed, then they have a urinary blockage, and so then they have to have a catheter and, and that kind of stuff and so on. And then that clears, and it was a little while after that they had a mini stroke. One thing after another, after another, after another. And we might look at it and say, okay, well, one was a complication of the procedure, and this one was a complication of that procedure, and this one was a complication of that procedure, and so on and so forth. And yes, I understand that we usually look at things that way, but I would say we should look at it from a cause and effect standpoint. What you were doing is you were dealing with the effect. The cause remained. And as long as the cause remained, it must manifest itself some way. And if you took away the way that it was manifesting, then the cause had to manifest another way. And if you took that away, then it had to manifest another way. And if you took that away, you had to manifest another way until you do what?
Take away the cause.
You look for the cause and you remove the cause. Then it doesn't have to keep going through different manifestations. Right? So it's important to look for the cause. It's really important. Let's get all of that. So when it comes to the law of cause and effect, we recognize that every effect must have a cause. Every cause must produce an effect. That if the effect is present, then that means the cause is present. As long as the effect is a process, a continuing process. Right? Now, if it's not a process, well, the effect can still be present and the cause can be long gone. For example, you could have had a car accident, and in the car accident you lost a limb. You lost your arm or something like that. Well, the car accident came and went. You might not have an arm for the rest of your life, and so that kind of effect might remain present even when the cause is gone. But if the effect is a continuing process, then as long as that process continues, the cause must still be there. Because there has to be something providing the power and the resources for that process to continue. Right? And so, if that process continues, and you find the cause and you remove it, then the process must stop. Right? It must stop. And no effect can produce itself because it's dependent upon power and materials outside of itself in order to function. So you will never find an effect without a cause. What do you call an effect without a cause? What word do we use to describe that?
Enigma?
Okay, an enigma, yes. There's a more common term that we use for it.
Hypochondria?
Chance.
Chance?
Chance.
Okay.
Chance is the idea that you can get the effect without having a cause. Right? So there is no such thing as chance. There is no such thing as chance. Chance is a figment of our delusion. And really, there is nothing that is truly random. Random is simply our inability to predict the next step or the outcome. Ask God whether he can predict the next step and what the outcome is going to be. Now, clearly he can. There is nothing that's random. Right? Now, if I believe that the cause is the effect, or I believe that the effect is the cause, then I will never understand how something functions. Right? If we get it backwards, if we turn it around and we think the effect is the cause, or we think the cause is the effect, we're in trouble. Because now we're going to go after what we think the problem is. Right? So in this case, as you see the picture here, what we're going to do is we're going to fix the problem by sending an ambulance down in the valley to rescue all the people that have gone off the cliff. Because we see this as the cause, and so we're going to go and we're going to treat the cause. But is that the cause? No, that's the effect of not having lines, not having guardrails, putting the road too close to the edge of a cliff, and and all that kind of stuff. So if you understood the situation the right way, well, you would put slower speed limit signs, you would put markers on the road, you would put a guardrail around the edge, and then you don't have to worry about this down here in the bottom. Right? So if you get it backwards and you see the effect is the cause and the cause is the effect, you're always going to try to correct problems the wrong way. You're never going to fix the problems or find the cure. And so therefore we must understand cause and effect correctly. We must understand it correctly. Now, when it comes to cause and effect, also recognize it's kind of like a chain of dominoes, right? The domino number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, here we go, this is domino number 5. Yes, that might be the cause of domino 6 going down, but it's not the cause because it's still an effect. What you're looking for is you're looking to the first domino, or what happened to the first domino. Every other domino is simply an effect. And I'll tell you this, science will never, ever, ever discover the first domino and what happens to it. They won't. But science does very good at looking at the dominoes after that point, right? And you know, I mean, we understand all sorts of biochemical pathways and so on, and we know that this molecule gets changed to that molecule, which gets changed to that molecule, which produces that energy, which runs this function in this cell, and so on and so forth. So science knows this stuff back here pretty well, but it'll never figure this out. It'll never figure it out. And we might get into why later. So you've got cells, and you have, as an adult, 50 to 100 trillion cells in your body, and you have somewhere around 250 different types of cells. And each cell functions kind of like a factory, and a factory, of course, produces product, and cells can produce lots of products. And the function of your body is dependent upon the function of your individual cells. Right? And if you lose a particular type of cell, you are going to lose any function or any product that is specific to that type of cell in the entire body. For example, type 1 diabetes. You have somebody that with type 1 diabetes, it kills off your beta islet cells in the pancreas. And the beta islet cells in your pancreas are the only cells in the body that produce insulin. That's right. So if you don't have beta islet cells, you are not going to produce insulin. Do you need insulin to live? Yes, you do. That's right. And if you're not producing it yourself and you're not taking it from outside and injecting it, you are going to die. And you will die quite quickly. And so you must have it. And so if you lose the cells that produce it, well, then the body can't produce it because it's dependent upon the cells in order to function. Now, a cause will immediately begin to produce an effect. So once you have the cause in place, the effect will now start right away. Right? So in type 1 diabetes, it's an autoimmune condition where the white blood cells start killing off the beta islet cells. And so they'll start doing that. Once the cause is in place, then they'll start killing off beta islet cells, and they'll start right away. But it may take time for the effect to become large enough in order to be noticed. Right? And that time can vary, right? Some disease processes are faster, others are slower. Some, it's seconds, minutes, or hours between the cause being in place and the effect being noticed. You know? And other ones, it can be years or even decades where it's in place and you didn't know it was there until it finally builds up enough that you finally have symptoms associated with it, and you go, oh, let's check into this. And you had it for a decade or more. You know? But if you're looking for the cause, and you want to know what the cause is, it must meet this criteria, and that is the cause had to be in place before the effect is noticed. Right? So before you had your first symptom of whatever the thing is, the cause had to be there before that time. Right? Because the cause can't come later. If the cause comes later, it's not the cause. Right? Because the cause always comes before the effect. Right? Now, the cause can be there for quite a while before the effect manifests, or it can be there just shortly before the effect manifests, but it has to be before. And if the effect is a disease, and a disease is a process, if the effect is still present, that means the cause is also present. So you're looking for something that was before you had your first symptom, and something that's still there now. So that's what you're looking for. And if the cause is removed, then the effect must begin to go away. So when I'm dealing with somebody and they have a health challenge and whatever, one of the most important questions I ask is, when was the first symptom that you had of that condition? How old were you? When, and so on. And then after we figure out what they remember was the first of their symptoms associated with that, then my question is, what was going on around that time? What was going on before that time? What was happening? And I like to dig, because I know the more you dig, the more associations you find. And if you don't have time to dig, you don't find the associations. Right? Now, every function in nature needs at least two elements. It needs something that generates or enables that function, and like an electrical impulse, in living systems, it's always an electrical impulse, even in plants. There's an electrical impulse at germination from the ground, right? Well, I say from the ground, through the ground. From who?
From God.
From God, that's right. And there must be something that sustains or perpetuates the function, and so there must be some form of fuel. And the fuel and the spark are different. They're different. And you've got to have both. Got to have both. So every cell must have fuel, every cell must have the spark, and every cell functions according to that fundamental law, so that means the cell itself must take of these things. And does it take just to take?
Nope.
No, it takes to
Give.
give, right? So it's going to do something with it, produce something with what it takes, right? And so the fuel of the cells, well, that's your oxygen, your water, your nutrients, it's chemicals. Right? The fuel for your cells is chemicals. And so you must have the chemicals in order for the cells to survive. And every chemical must get into the body through some system. If it's oxygen, it's going to come in through your lungs or your respiratory tract, and then it gets into your system. But how many cells in your body need the oxygen?
All of them.
Yeah, all of them, right? So, how are you going to get all of that oxygen to all of the parts of the body?
With the blood.
Ah, all right, through the blood. So you have to have a transport mechanism, and the blood is the transport mechanism. And so it's what carries all the fuel that the cells need in order to continue their function, to perpetuate their function. And so therefore, you need circulation. And if you've got problems with your circulation, well, you're going to have problems. And somebody a long time ago once said, perfect health depends upon perfect circulation, right? Because the cells need the fuel in order to function. And cells can extract the chemicals that they need if the chemicals are in a good quantity and concentration. Right? If there's too little of the chemicals that it needs, you're going to run into problems. And if there's too much of the chemicals that you need, you're going to run into problems as well. But you don't only need the chemicals, you don't only need the fuel, you also need the spark. So how many cells, how many of the cells must be coordinated in their function?
All of them.
Yeah, all of them. Right? All of the cells need to be coordinated in their function. Do the cells do their own coordinating? Or are they coordinated? Does something else coordinate the function of the cells, or do they all choose for themselves? All right. Do the cells generate their own electrical impulse, or do they need the electrical impulse from outside?
From outside.
Yeah, from outside. So, because the law is you must take in order to
Give.
give, right? All energy necessary for a system to function must come from outside of that system. So the spark must come from outside of the cell, just as the fuel must come from outside of the cell, and both must make it to the cell in order for the cell to function. And yes, cells function as electrochemical units. You must have the electricity and you must have the chemistry in order for it to function. So, where does the electricity come from that gets the cells going and that coordinates the function of the cells?
From God.
From your stomach,
From the brain.
kidneys,
From mind.
liver? Okay, it's the brain, right? So your central nervous system, that's from the cortex of the brain, the electrical activity begins, right? And then that's carried down via the nerves to the various different parts of the body. And then the nerves release chemicals that are taken in by the cells, and it can upregulate, downregulate, stop processes, start processes, and so on. And so the major controller of the functions of the body is going to be here, right? And yes, you have the electrical activity from the cortex of the brain that's sent down to the center part of the brain. It crosses sides, so right side crosses over to the left and left side crosses over to the right. And then that's sent down the spinal cord, and then those through the nerves are going to be sent to your muscles, to your digestive system, to your endocrine system, like your thyroid and other places, and all the different places of the body. And there's going to be signals that will be sent back from each of those places in a reverse direction so that you can have a feedback mechanism so that you can control everything that's happening in the body. So it's through the nervous system that all of the other functions in the body are controlled. And the question is, where does the nervous system get the spark from?
From the Holy Spirit.
Okay, all right. So there must be a power, right? There must be a power, because electricity is a power. Now, if you've ever studied physics, then you know that there is at least in a closed system, there is conservation of power, or conservation of energy. And energy can change from one form to another form to another form to another form, but it's always energy, right? And so here in the cortex of the brain and down the nerves, you've got electricity, that's the form of the energy. But what's the form of the energy before that? And where does it come from, or where does it come through? And everything that you need comes through an organ or an organ system. So what organ or organ system does that come through to get to the brain? So since we're in the Bible Belt, we can talk about things from a standpoint that we can't necessarily in the secular setting. But the Bible says that the Word of God is with power. Right? Power. Right? God spoke and it
It's done.
was done. Right? Right? And Jesus said, the words that I speak to you, they are not life first. He said they are spirit.
They are life.
And they are life, right? And so the Word of God is with power. The power comes in spiritual information, right? Comes in spiritual information, and the Word of God is a spiritual information, right? Love is a spiritual information, right? And we are not just physical, we are spiritual as well. Genesis 2, verse 7. God formed man of the dust of the ground, breathed into his nostrils a breath of life, and man became a living
Being so.
soul. That's right. So dust is quite simple. The body is not.
Yeah, man.
Breath is quite simple. But what it turned into was not. Right? So we are a soul. You don't have a soul. You are a soul. But as a soul, your soul is made up of two components. In its simple form, it's dust and breath. But in its complex form, it's body and spirit. Right? And those are the two components that make up the soul. Just like a computer is made up of hardware and software. And if you only have hardware, you got no function. And if you only have software, you've got nothing going on. You must have both together in order for it to function. Similarly, you must have spirit and body together in order for there to be any function. And if they're not, body's not functioning, spirit's not functioning, there's no function. You only function as a whole, as a soul. And so you do not only have a body, but you also have a spirit. And it's through the spirit that the spiritual information is taken in. And while your body has the fuel of chemicals, the spirit requires the power of information. It requires the power of information. And so the spirit feeds on that information, and then it makes that power available to the cortex of the brain. And when it gets into the physical structure, now it generates electricity, and that electrical impulse is sent down through the nerves to the different cells of the body and looking at controlling their function. And what kind of information does the spirit need in order to function correctly?
The Word.
It needs the Word. And the Word is truth. Because truth is information that puts things in the correct order so they function. Error simply reorders the information so that it reorders the structure and it ends up in dysfunction. Right? So you do not need error, you need truth. And when truth is the foundation of the spiritual information that you take in, that through this pathway will lead to proper function of the cells and the tissues and the organs and the organ systems and so on and so forth. But if you are taking in lies or error as if it's the truth, because you can only take in a lie if you believe it's true. You cannot take in a lie if you believe it's a lie. So you only take a lie in if you believe that it's true, and so this can only happen under the context of a deception or a delusion. And when the mind, which is the combination of the brain and the spirit, the mind is not just the brain, when the mind, which is a combination of the brain and the spirit, is under a delusion, then it will take lies, and that has a different power. And that different power ends up with a different impulse in the brain, which is a different signal sent down via the nerves to the different parts of the body, and that will, in some place, in some way, result in dysfunction. So, we'll call her Amy. So Amy, she was struggling. She had eczema, severe eczema of her hands. I don't remember her case well enough to remember which hand it began in, but by the time I was involved in the case and knew what was going on, her eczema was quite severe. It was in both hands. It was torture to wash dishes because her hands would crack and bleed and so on, and she was always putting gloves on and putting, some kind of salve or lotion inside in order to try to keep her hands from cracking and bleeding. She had small children at the time that she was taking care of as well, and this was just very problematic, very problematic. And oh boy, we tried all sorts of natural remedies, and we tried different salves, and we tried different anti-inflammatory things with turmeric and ginger and, the things that we could think of, and her hands would just not get better. And it was, painful and problematic, right? And we recognize that with eczema is an autoimmune condition again. So you have the immune system that's attacking the skin, and then it's breaking down the skin, and then you have these dry, flaky, cracking, itchy, sometimes painful and bleeding symptoms associated with it. And but we must ask ourselves the question, why the hands? Why the hands? Right? Don't you have an immune system in all of your body?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the brain's a little bit protected, at least as far as your normal white blood cells are concerned. They don't go floating around in the brain and so on. But the rest of the body, and they're discovering that the brain has its own kind of immune system function that's happening there. But the white blood cells are everywhere. So why the hands? Right? Why is it manifesting there? It's not because you only have white blood cells in your hands. No, you got white blood cells everywhere, but you got the problem there. So what causes it to localize there? We have to ask those questions. Now, if you don't have the answers, don't ask the questions. If you don't have the answers, don't ask the questions. If you have the answers, well, if you're curious enough and you're humble enough to recognize you don't have the answers, but you want to find out, then you start asking the questions, right? And you can tell them, well, I don't know, but it's interesting to find out, anyways, So there is a reason, and I do know the reason, but we're not there yet. So, anyways, what did she have to deal with?
A lot of chores. House chores.
Well, she happened to have married an individual that her parents didn't approve of. And there was constantly pressure from her parents, both her father and her mother, in relation to her marriage. And she grew up in somewhat of a secular family. And her husband was, actually, both of them were quite secular when they met each other and so on. But then they had a conversion experience, and then they started going to church and, learning about God and all this kind of stuff. And then they're learning about country living, and then about natural remedies and other things of that nature. And so they're pursuing this life and lifestyle, and her parents are not happy at all with anything that she's doing, with how she's raising her grandkids, with how she's in another country away from them, with how she, and so on. And so she has all of this pressure, and with this pressure, she puts her husband under pressure, and so on, and he doesn't behave how she expects for him to behave, and then the children are there, and she has to take care of them, and they don't always behave how they're supposed to behave, and so she's got a whole bunch of people around her that aren't behaving well. And it wasn't until she significantly addressed those issues, especially with husband and parents, and her expectations of their behaviors and who she's going to take as her source and so on and so forth. It wasn't until she significantly dealt with those issues that her eczema went away and her hands were normal. Right? I'll call him Doug. Doug's a friend of mine, and he I met him at Uchee Pines. In fact, he wasn't one of the patients, his wife was. And he was there and he was listening to one of the lectures that I was giving, and he was intrigued by what I was sharing. And so we had a conversation afterwards and talked about a few things. And I encouraged him to get my book, The Law of Life, and he could investigate further. And so they did, and they went home, and it sat on the shelf for about 4 months. And eventually they decided, well, we have this book, we might as well read it. And so they started reading it, and they were just like, oh, wow, oh, wow. And they had started kind of a community outreach by doing a book club, and they decided next time they were doing their book club, they were going to do The Law of Life. And so they did, and so they did a whole iteration of The Law of Life, every week going through a chapter and doing a book club on The Law of Life, and people were really interested, and then COVID hit. And so they had to switch to a virtual platform, and so they started doing it via Zoom, and they did the second round of doing the Law of Life book club. And then they did a third round of doing the Law of Life book club. And while they were on the third round, and they were covering one of the chapters in the book, Doug realized that he had an unresolved conflict with a coworker that had been ongoing for quite a while, and it was kind of smoldering in the back of his mind, and their relationship was quite strained, and so on. And he realized that it was his responsibility to go make things right, to apologize at least for his side of the issue, and to, offer to resolve whatever things that he could, and to bring his situation to the cross and accept the exchange of his life with the life of Christ, so that he's not the victim of anything that they said or did, that he can be free, And so he did. And of course he didn't tell me until a while later, and I didn't know that he had been struggling with anything, but Doug had an issue with ulcerative colitis. And ulcerative colitis is another autoimmune condition, and this time it's where the immune system attacks the colon, and it starts in the latter part of the colon, and it starts eating up the lining of the colon, and it keeps going until it finishes through the whole colon. And if, it's painful, bleeding, all sorts of stuff, bloating and diarrhea, and it's a mess. And it's not something that you want. And even if it goes throughout the entire colon, well, your likelihood of developing colon cancer with ulcerative colitis is almost 100% if your colon remains, right? If that inflammation and everything is not under control. So he tried lifestyle changes, he tried natural remedies, and he didn't want to do drugs and whatever, but situations are situations, and sometimes you get into a situation and you realize, well, no, I got to try something else. And so he did. He started on steroids, and his symptoms got a little better, but it was still there. And then that wasn't working so well, and so they started working on biologics and stronger medication. And so he was sort of under control, but on heavy medications and still having symptoms. But when he resolved that issue with his coworker, guess what? Tell me.
It went away.
Yeah, it went away. The ulcerative colitis went away. And he's doing good. And he's still doing good. And I just talked to him this week. Actually, yesterday. Anyways, so he's still doing well. And it's, now it's, about 5 years after that time. And so on. So it tells us, right, these different cases show us that what's going on in the mind has an impact upon the body. Now, I'm not saying that what's going on in the mind is the only thing that impacts the body. Right? I'm not saying that. There's inheritance, there's chemicals, there's trauma, physical trauma, there's the enemy's involvement, and so on and so forth, like with Job and whatever. But we are told that 9/10 of diseases have their foundation in the mind. So if 90% of the time the disease is going to have its origin in the mind, it makes sense that if somebody has a disease, you go looking for the cause in the right place, right? And if 90% of the time you're going to find it in the mind, it makes sense to go looking there. But you have to have time. You got to have time in order to be able to go looking there. And in the healthcare system, you don't have time. So you can't go looking there. And if you don't have the time, don't ask the questions. And if you don't ask the questions, then you don't see the associations or the correlations that are there. But if you can break out of the system, if you can have enough time with patients, if you can ask the questions, then you start seeing the associations. And they're strong. Very strong. And that's what I didn't learn in medical school. And tomorrow we're going to pick up from here, and we're going to move on, getting deeper into understanding how we function, the laws that govern that function, and how that relates now not just to physical health, but how does that start relating to relationships and all of our lives, and how does this all come together into a single thing that then can be resolved, and how can it be resolved? So that's what we're going to look at for our journey through this weekend. And so I'm going to pray, and then we can get some rest for our minds. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your blessings. Thank you for this day that you have made. Lord, thank you for these amazing bodies and minds that you have made for us as well. And Lord, open our eyes this weekend that we might see and understand how we function, why we dysfunction, and what we can do to cooperate with you in regaining function. And this I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
All right. How many are grateful for Dr. Sandoval's presentation? Amen. All right, so we're going to continue tomorrow at the church, beginning at 9:30, okay, sharp. You know, there's a lot of people celebrating, or maybe you have celebrated it earlier today, I'm not sure, but a lot of people are celebrating Valentine's Day today, right? What a great way to learn to remember, one way, the love that God has for us. And then number two, to love ourselves the way God loves us, and to be wanting to take care of our bodies and our minds. So thank you, Dr. Sandoval. We'll see you all tomorrow. So tomorrow morning, 9:30, it starts. Several presentations tomorrow throughout the day. We're going to have lunch as well. Some more presentations in the evening, and then all the way through Sunday. All right. So it's on YouTube. So I'll share with you the links, and then you feel free to share it with others as well. All right. Have a good night.